Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this next episode of the Waiting on Your Best Behavior podcast. Up until now, I have done the podcast as a deep dive into risk theory and risk personality. For those of you who don't know me, I am Pete. I am a philosopher by education, and I am a professional risk player. And the goal of this episode is to discuss the work of Peter Joseph, who is a public intellectual, humbly one of, in my opinion, the most important public intellectuals alive today. Peter Joseph is the creator of the Zeigeist films. That's how I originally came to know him. Current author of the new human rights movement book and podcast series of the same name, activist, in general, brilliant polymath, in my humble opinion. I'm not going to agree with everything he says, and I don't think we need to, and I don't think he would care. But the goal of this show is to deconstruct, pick apart, and ultimately hope to understand a little bit about what Peter Joseph is talking about, why you should care, and if this work is well received, please let me know. And I have been kicking around the idea in my head of doing more of a series on this person. And with me today is Sean, and I will allow Sean the opportunity to introduce himself.
Hi there. I'm Sean. I'm not Peter Joseph. You may have thought I was Peter Joseph briefly there, but I'm not. I have been a software engineer for a very long time. I started writing code when I was 12 years old or so. And I've been on the inside of some of this Silicon Valley nonsense that's happened in the last 25 years. And that's given me a lot of time to think about the implications of it. And that's why I'm interested in this topic as well. I also am interested in risk and Magic the Gathering and probably other things that Pete's interested in as well. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, and Sean reached out to me in the hopes that we could build mutual understanding and also help discuss these ideas, which tend towards the complex in an accessible way. And with that in mind, we have a bunch of stops on this video, but I'm going to let Peter Joseph introduce himself. This is already an older work. This is 13 years ago.
The title of this presentation is The Big Question, Environmental Misalignment and the Value War. Human society today has two diametrically opposed systems of economy. One is our traditionally imposed mode of monetary market economics. The other is a physical rule structure emerging from our growing scientific recognition of reality, both environmentally and sociologically. The consequence is an ever-increasing level of social destabilization and an ongoing decline in public health.
Okay, so that is a broad framework. What are your thoughts, Sean?
Yes, it is. So just for the record, I can't hear the YouTube audio, so I might be a little bit off, but it's okay.
How would I share that with you?
I'm not sure. But I can say this thing about the value war that he mentions. So I think it would be useful. It would have been useful actually if he had explained it at the beginning of his talk, because what value war? So the thing that he's referring to, I think it must be his own frustration when he tries to explain his ideas sometimes that people have these just gut reactions to things, even just certain words, and they associate certain values with them, like I am for this or I'm against that. And I think it's always important to avoid doing that. It's important to avoid like having that reaction and sticking to that, and let your sort of the rest of your brain work for a minute when he's talking. So he's going to say some of these words that I know when I was younger, especially, I associated values with them that I don't anymore.
You might have found them triggering emotionally. right?
Exactly.
You might have related your identity to some of these beliefs.
Exactly.
One of the things that philosophers tend to do well um, is to detach themselves from the ideas and pay attention to the quality of the argument, independent of how we may think or feel about it. Um, and I personally like to keep myself fairly flexible and open to new information. I try my best not to identify with any sort of ideology as a heuristic. And I know that makes me kind of odd, but it has borne a lot of fruit in my life in terms of being able to see, quote, both sides of an issue. There's often more than two.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
In fact, speaking of more than two, he says there's two ways that things work, but no, there's more than that.
often-
But
often
anyway,
more. Yeah.
great.
So,
Increasing level of social destabilization and an ongoing decline in public health. I've divided this into two brief sections. The first part is called System Clash, Market Efficiency versus Technical Efficiency. To part two, Value Wars, Societal Potential Collapse and Transition, what we're capable of doing, what's in store for us if we don't, how we can get out of this system, etc. Before we begin, part one, economy. What is economy? It's defined in Greek as the management of a household, a definition that's often lost. To economize, what does that mean? It means to increase efficiency. Keep that in mind. Reducing waste. That's what an economy is supposed to be.
so Peter Joseph has set up the term economy. And the definition he's using is a traditional definition, not sort of the way you would intuitively think of the economy. He's using it as the root of the word, which is to efficiently manage resources.
Yeah.
Defining my terms. We're going to use two terms throughout this presentation. The first is a theoretical notion of an earth economy, which I'll define as decisions made directly based upon scientific understandings as they relate to optimized habitat management and human health.
And then this will be something that I think Sean has already kind of led us into, the idea that because Peter Joseph is talking about fairly complex things that we don't always have great terms for, he sometimes has to come up with his own. And I personally feel like he needs a little bit of help with his
Yeah.
with his terminology choices.
Yeah.
I don't hate the term Earth economy, but I don't think it groks simply, right? I think it kind of requires this paragraph to build out. But my sort of digestion of what this term means is, so when we think about our economy, right, when we think about the market, we think about a place where goods and services are exchanged. Whereas this Earth economy is simply the stock of all possible resources and labor. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I have a little bit of a different way of slicing it. The way I wish he sliced it is more like there's this game that we're playing, which is the market economy, and there's this stuff that's just true, like that the earth has finite resources, that there's a certain number of people, like those are just facts. And I think when you think about what to do with those facts, then that's where things start to get complicated. And I think his way of framing it here assumes a certain way of thinking about those facts. But they're just facts, right? And he'll emphasize that again in the video. Like, these are just things that are true. We know them. We should apply that knowledge.
So what would you use as a term, if not Earth economy?
Yeah. It's a good question. So this gets into that value wars thing a little bit, right? Okay, so here's one of those triggering words, Earth, right? Remember Earth Day? I don't know if anyone remembers Earth Day from when they were a kid. But there's a certain like set of messages that go together with these terms, Earth, environment, and you can see that he's using those terms. And I don't think that that perfectly aligns with the way that I think about it. Like we said before, you don't put yourself in a box like I'm an environmentalist or something, right? I don't think he would put himself in that box, but he's pretty close to that box. I think definitely a lot of his friends are in that box.
So you're suggesting that he might be using the terms of activism either to signal to people that he's associated with, or to trigger certain types of emotional reactions in his audience.
Yeah, and I think it like triggering emotional reactions like that though is unavoidable, right? Like this,
Sure.
there's been so much effort put into building feelings around things like this that it's impossible to talk about things without triggering emotions, and I think that's getting more true over time.
I think that depends on who you talk to. You got to talk to the right people though.
Yeah, okay. Well, a lot of people I talk to are getting triggered, and I know much.
Almost everyone you meet. No, I take your point. So we can also think on this one. I do sincerely want to, if anything, help Peter Joseph in his work. So
yeah,
when I do find a term that doesn't really neatly meet my intuition about what I think it means, I kind of do spend a little bit of time, because I'm, I humbly like to think I have a pretty good marketing mind, coming up with titles and terms and jargon for risk. So we'll work on it.
great.
Production and distribution is regulated by the most technically efficient and sustainable approaches known. Compared to our currently existing market economy, defined, decisions are based on independent human actions through the vehicle of monetary exchange, regulated by the pressures of supply and demand. Production and distribution is enabled by the buying and selling of labor and material provisions, with the motivations of a person or a group, the self-interest, as the defining attribute of unfolding.
Okay, so the definition of market economy that Peter Joseph uses, do we like this?
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing that I don't like about it, which I think comes later as well in this video, we'll talk about it more, is the notion of self-interest. He'll mention that several times.
Sure.
And I think I might have a different perspective than he does about self-interest. But
okay.
I mean, this thing of like money flows around, people are making individual decisions. We've studied this game really well. Like, people have, Nobel Prizes in economics from studying this game. This is a game we all play. The whole world is playing this game. I think we all understand it a lot. I think maybe what we don't understand is what would happen if we didn't. but I think this is
a far more philosophical question than an economic one.
Yes, but it's also an economic one. We have to do something.
I think your framework of it as a game is a great way to approach thinking about economics. I think the word science is thrown around in reference to this game as if it was such, right? As if it was such as a science, but it is not, right? It is a somewhat deterministic, always contingent upon almost incalculable variables, adaptive system that, to give the devil its due here, that has provided for the abundance that most of us enjoy in the world, right? I really think it's also important to recognize, right, not to just gloss over and vilify market economics, right? It's important to recognize that the lights are on, the power is on. We're watching this video on YouTube, and we're having a discussion halfway around the world, and I'm able to, beam this out to you good folks watching and listening. So it's like, this is good, right? We're coming at it from a starting position that we're not in abject poverty, right? So most
of us.
Well, sure,
Some of us are.
but
That's the problem.
thankfully, less and less, right? Thankfully,
Yes.
less and less. So, I really dislike the black and white thinking that goes on in so much media, where it's like, this is the
Yeah.
enemy. I'm going to simplify and I'm going to attack it. I'm going to strawman it. It's like, no, markets are good for what they're good at. And one of the things they're probably the most significant thing they're good at is solving the problem of distribution. Not solving isn't even a good way to put it. Mitigating the damage of distribution. We are
Yeah.
very terrible at equitable distribution, and this
Yeah.
one, yeah, okay,
Yeah. I mean, this game has had a lot of nice side effects for a lot of people.
for a lot of people.
It's changed the world. So yeah, in a lot of good ways.
That was much fewer words. Well done.
This is a chart of 7 economic attributes, many more, but this is what I wanted to focus on here. Basically, they are intrinsic to each economy in comparison. Obviously, I'm focusing on the market economy and its relationship to a natural system, what we're calling the Earth economy.
What do you think about the chart here?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is so much information to take in at once. This is, he knows that words trigger people, and yet he gives us so many words all at once. This is like sure to trigger everyone. Maybe that's on purpose, but there's so much to dig into here. I mean, like, spoiler alert, the rest of the talk, he's going to dig into each of these items kind of individually. So that I think that's good.
Okay.
To a natural system, what we're calling.
I have reactions to some of them, but I'll save them until.
The only caveat here with these asterisks are elements of our sociological development based on scientific integrity, scientific ingenuity, the evolution of science, and our knowledge of ourselves and the environment. That will be talked about as we go along, as we touch upon each one of these. First point, consumption. In a market economy, the entire thing is based on consumption. The only reason that you're wearing clothes, the only reason you're eating, the only reason that you have a home is because someone somewhere is buying a service or getting a service, exchanging money in some form, and consuming.
So I led with the pro, and this is the con, right? The pro of markets is they provide, what did you say? Some amount of abundance for some amount of people.
A lot of good side effects.
A lot of good side effects. Sure.
Yes, for a lot of people. Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it. And then this is sort of the price. The price is that there is someone who's winning. There is consumption.
That's what this system is. What does the natural world have to say about that? What does an Earth economy have to say? Well, in all reason, the Earth is a finite closed system. Preservation, not consumption, should be the ethos.
Okay. Preservation, not consumption, should be the ethos.
I'm going to hard disagree with that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think change is good. I don't think preservation is the right word here. So I would rather put it as more like long-term thinking versus short-term thinking. So markets are all about making money as fast as you can right now. What are you going to do next quarter? What are you going to do next year? Whereas long-term thinking is more like, what's going to happen if we do this for the next 50 years? And this long-term thinking, by the way, now is also another one of these value war words, which I don't know, some of your listeners might be familiar with. Yeah, so there's this thing called long-termism, which is another thing that I also don't agree with. But it's an interesting philosophical take, which basically says that you should always think about the very long-term future when you make all of your decisions.
But how long is the appropriate
level? Right. Well, I mean, people
have to decide.
Yeah, and also who gets to like, whose prediction about the long term are we using here, and how accurate could it possibly be?
Well, the longer you go, the less accurate, in fact, right?
Yeah, always. Yeah. And I think people have a hard time predicting next week. So it's, I don't agree with long-termism. Again, if you come up with an ism, I'm going to say right away I don't agree with it.
Yeah, pick out, right? Ideological dogmatism is dangerous for your thinking. This is something I strongly stand behind. I want my ideas to stand and fall on their merit, and both are a win for me. Don't get too hooked into your ego. Don't get too obsessed with whatever anyone thinks or says, right? Make sure that your ideas stand the rigor of scrutiny. Otherwise, they're
Yeah.
probably shitty.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I
intrinsic,
agree.
sorry, consumption versus preservation.
Yeah.
This is kind of a very, very like classic sort of Peter Joseph dichotomy, though, right? He's going to look at the economy and he's going to vilify it and he's going to say, the economy is at the root of most of the evils in the world, and what is the solution to that? And I, to his credit, I think Peter Joseph has offered some of the best solutions of anyone I've ever heard. And these are incredibly difficult problems. So I think a lot of
Yeah.
the activism he's associated with is focused mainly around awareness of these issues because they're hard problems to solve, and we need really smart people having the types of conversations that you and I are having right now, right?
Yeah.
But those who can actually effect change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Consumption
I think
should be the infant.
especially just talking about the problems. I love the way he talks about the problems, the downsides of the way we do things. I find it a pretty unique take among all the things I've seen. I like
Yeah,
it.
and like he does with some pomp, some flash, but
Yeah,
it I really like a dispassionate argument.
yeah,
That's the one that's gonna resonate with me, and maybe I'm not the average person here.
If you lived on an island with a small group of people and you had a finite amount of resources with a natural generation of growth, a very simplified society, would you decide to make an economic system that tried to use that up as fast as possible? No, and I'm afraid the Earth is an isolated island in a vast sea, cosmic sea, if you will, and is a lot smaller than we think. Point two,
So the idea that the Earth is an isolated island in cosmic sea, the idea that resources are limited, this is actually something that I just want to add my thinking here, and there is, in my opinion, I'm actually curious what you think too, man. There is one unlimited resource, um, which is human creativity. I think we don't fully recognize or appreciate our potential to literally make the future, right? We build everything that you see and use around you that was created by a person was first thought of as an idea in their head. That doesn't seem to me to be a limited resource. What do you think?
yeah. That's an interesting. It's an interesting way to put it.
Hmm.
I I don't know if I think of it as a resource,
Okay.
but it is. But I do agree that it's. I think we don't really understand the limits of what we can do.
Hmm.
We keep doing new cool stuff,
Yes.
and I love it. And I think a lot of the things that we do in the world and the society does, and the way that we're trained, actually limits our creativity, or at least doesn't get the best out of us.
By massive degrees, right? Our constraints here, right? To your earlier point about different words triggering different emotional responses,
Yeah,
what you believe to be true does literally determine your reality because it will define what you are able to create and what you will do. So one of the I'm going to introduce this is a Pete concept now. Um, I like to call it the "that's never going to happen" box. And when I'm talking to someone and I'm talking to them about ideas with a certain amount of scary frequency, one of the most common types of criticisms I will get of my idea is what I call the "that's never going to happen" box, right? Well,
yeah,
that's impossible. That's just never going to happen. Okay, well, I guess the conversation is over,
yeah,
right? If you
yeah,
exist there, it's not an argument. It's not even a
yeah,
critique. It's just a stop. it's this weird kind of learned helplessness that constrains our creativity, our mutual human creativity, and it seems to be learned. But I
Yeah.
don't know. Have you? I'm sure you've experienced this a ton in your life.
Oh, for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, like as a person who has pitched a lot of like crazy ideas, I've gotten this a lot.
Mhm.
And I've learned that it basically doesn't mean anything. I mean,
Right.
it means one thing, which is that that person is not going to give you any money. But but other than that, it doesn't really tell you anything about your idea. Because I think like most really good ideas seem kind of unbelievable when they first enter your head or when they first come out of your mouth.
Yes.
And I don't know. This feels like a game theory thing to me, where people are making this choice. Like, am I going to be a believer and that I'm going to seem stupid when it turns out not to work,
Mm-hmm.
or am I going to be a skeptic and that I'm going to seem cool when it turns out not to work? And if it turns out to work, like, oh, that's not very likely, then whatever. I can blame it on something else.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It feels like the math is just imbalanced there about believing in stuff.
My take here is that if we were to do a personality profile of you, I don't know if you've ever done your Big Five, but I'm very high openness.
Yeah.
So I think there is a trait personality aspect to how far a person's own model of that crazy idea can go. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of at the root of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then how did you and I end up here talking about this? I may also be very high on openness.
This is my
It's
intuition. This is why I
possible.
mentioned it. Okay, so obsolescence. What is the difference between intrinsic and planned obsolescence?
Obsolescence. The market system is driven explicitly by obsolescence. 2, intrinsic obsolescence. Intrinsic obsolescence being the use of cost efficiency, meaning that every good produced has to be inferior the moment it's made because the corporate institutions must save money at the very beginning of production to remain competitive against everyone else that's competing.
That's a lot. So, at the point of creation, this is Peter Joseph's assertion, at the point of creation, any good must be of inferior quality, such that it degrades and at some point requires replacement. And this is due to the profit motive. This is essentially a definition
Yeah.
of either intrinsic or planned obsolescence or both. But you can immediately walk the logic out and see how this results in a tremendous amount of wasted resources.
Yeah.
Planned obsolescence, which is much more insidious, which is basically a form of fraud, even though it's completely codified and formalized as a marketing tactic, basically designs goods to break down under the assumption of repeat purchases. And it's truly amazing that this exists at all. And what does nature have to say about this? Well, building upon what we've just stated, it's environmentally irresponsible to design goods to fail or allow them to fail unnecessarily.
And what does nature
Yeah.
have to say about this?
So on planned obsolescence, I wanted to mention an example of this because I know I didn't realize that like this really happened, and not only did this really happen, but we have like records of it.
Oh yeah.
So there was something called the Phoebus cartel.
Mhm.
So the Phoebus cartel was a whole bunch of light bulb companies way back in the day, back when light bulbs were first becoming popular. They all together realized, uh-oh, if we make light bulbs that last forever, then people aren't going to buy light bulbs anymore.
We go out of business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they actually got together and agreed on a standard lifetime for light bulbs to last. And they also tested each other to make sure nobody was breaking the agreement. They would test each other's bulbs and make sure that they only lasted that long.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like well documented. There's
Yeah.
court cases, there's
yeah.
paper, there's a huge paper trail. So this is something that like you can imagine it happening. Of course.
Let's give them a more modern example, right? Apple, prior to the release of the next generation of iPhone, has been shown to slow down the software of the older one to encourage people
Yeah.
to upgrade. Right? This is
And
not. This is not like.
okay,
This is well documented in the modern
it
day.
is. But like I have a bit of a like Silicon Valley
Yeah, of
perspective on
course.
this, because I think that example is good.
Hmm.
Also because when you talk to the people who are involved in that, they will the whole time they will tell you a different reason why they were doing all those things.
Hmm.
And I think that just goes to show like they're preserving the battery life or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But
Post hoc rationalization on a corporate level.
exactly. But like the thing is, and I think this is so important. People assume that like there's a bad person like in Apple like sitting there making these decisions who knows what they're doing and they're doing it on purpose.
No, it's a
But
series of
that
systems failures.
yeah, it is a side effect of the way that the system is set up, so that smart people will just naturally do this, and they will find a way to do it that for them feels ethical,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy enough to do that it just happens all over the place.
Yes.
And it's just a long series of little decisions that each one of them seems to be okay. But at some point you're facing this like, well, okay, if I do it this way, I'm going to lose money. Well, I can't do that. I work for a company. I have to make money for the company. And just a long, like you add all those little decisions together and you get these big systemic effects. And that one like looks really bad when it's all done, you know,
That's
but it doesn't mean
that's the banality of evil.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
have you ever read this? You know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about. I
Yeah.
have not read it, but I do know what you're talking
So
about.
it's it's to do Hannah Arendt justice. The banality of evil refers to the reality that most results of evil in the world have less to do with malevolence, have less to do with bad acting people trying to cause undeserved pain. Not to say those people don't exist too, but I would say if you look at history, far and away, the vast majority of evil was banal, was something like these types of systems failures, where an ethic of humanism and an ethic of harm reduction, right, mitigating suffering, wasn't put at the highest aim, individually and culturally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, this is an ethical statement Peter Joseph is making, saying it's
Yes.
environmentally irresponsible to design goods to fail or allow them to fail unnecessarily. I struggle with the ethical framework here because I don't actually think that's not the angle of attack that I mean it's a deontological argument. So I would suppose that we do have a duty, an ethical duty to ourselves, to our future. Um and this is kind of the point in the conversation where I want to make a distinguishment between um, we often hear about the environment in culture and media. The
Yeah.
environment has become politicized, in fact, which is a very scary and strange thing for me to have borne witness to. Um, like when I was a kid, it was called the greenhouse effect, right? And then it was called global warming. And now it's the term being used is climate change. So
Yeah.
this concept creep is interesting. The politicization is interesting. I just as an aside, Sean, I mentioned the term climate change once in a Risk video.
Ooh.
And there's a tag now underneath that video. There will be under this one, I bet, because
Oh,
it
great.
because YouTube now auto detects the words. Right? It didn't like say that the video was misinformation or anything because
Yeah.
you know I'm not taking a stand, but it is very interesting to note. Um, you know, there you attest certain boxes for advertising friendly guidelines, but also this one is its own sort of thing, right? Where
Yeah.
I'm trying to fight misinformation, which this leads us to a free speech rabbit hole that we don't need to go down now. But
Yeah.
the simple point I'm trying to make is this: I would like to distinguish for you all listening to me. I talk about this from time to time. When environment comes up, it's very important to distinguish between the concepts of the environment and our environment. And I make this distinction because I don't think the environment exists in isolation. And what do I mean by that? Obviously, the world exists, and the world would exist without people, right? The point I'm making is the world doesn't actually have ethical value for people without people. So people are the thing that actually makes the environment matter to us and what makes it our environment to concern ourselves with, right? Concerning ourselves with a fictional world in a billion years that won't have any humans on it, there will still be a environment there, but it will no longer be ours. So the extent to which you and I need to care about a billion years hence is minor, if not zero. But the extent to which we need to care about the next 1,000 years is imminent and very concerning, right? This is I just like to use that framework. What do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense a lot. I mean, you I get, like you say, the terms, they keep changing because people are trying to align with certain groups or ideas or distance themselves from them. And I guess, yeah, like the YouTube AI is going to help with that now.
Sure it is.
But yeah, like, why do things matter, right? I think, what you captured there is like one of the reasons things matter is because it impacts people's lives.
Yeah.
And I think we all have a notion of like having a good life or suffering, and we don't wish suffering on other people. Again, most of us, a few of us probably do, but
Yeah.
most of us don't.
But it's generally considered that those are right. Those should never be the norm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Them to fail unnecessarily. That is basically offensive. We need optimum design to have things last, survive. Point 3, property. The ownership metaphysic is a core premise allowing controlled restriction of resources and goods. I say metaphysic because property isn't real. There's no such thing of ownership in the broad scheme, not either intellectual or physical goods. It's all transient. The idea of...
So what do you think about the idea that property is a metaphysical notion?
Yeah. So when I saw this, I was like, "Whoa, there! That's a strong claim." So I always think of just when you see really small children interacting with each other, that they have a notion of property, right? This is mine, not yours.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a good reason for that instinct, which I think. Yeah, as we go forward, maybe I can explain what I mean by that. But I would not go so far as to say property is not real. What do you think?
Well, I think real actually is the term here that gets conflated, not to fall down a philosophical rabbit hole about what words mean, but property is an intersubjective concept, right? Intersubjectivity refers to us having to agree that something is a property and then be the property of whom. And if we do not agree, as is so often the case, that is part of what makes it fraught. But that's also part of what makes it property. Like a tree exists in the world, and that is objective, right? We can experience the tree, and that is subjective. But the fact that someone may or may not own the tree, that is intersubjective. So when you say real, it comes down more to, real for whom, and my favorite example about the power of intersubjectivity was from *Sapiens*, from Yuval Noah Harari's book. He says, "Look, France is an intersubjective reality, right? Tigers are objectively real, but if France wanted to, it could make every tiger in the world disappear. So this isn't to say that it isn't powerful. But to just articulate what they are conceptually."
Interesting. Yeah, I like that.
Everyone owning one of everything, for example, does that make a lot of sense when we think about our natural economy? What about the use of goods? What about access? The natural environment demands access. Universal property is inefficient. Strategic access is more environmentally responsible as a model and more socially efficient. If you have a car that you drive maybe 40% of the time, why not let the other 60% be used by somebody else? You create a system of access and use. That's environmentally responsible.
Okay. Tell me what you think.
Yeah. Well, so his example is like ride sharing services, right? You have a car, it's sitting around most of the time. Why would you let it kind of go to waste, right? What we really need is for everyone to be able to get in a car when they need to, and not necessarily to have your own car that is just for you, and sitting there idle a lot of the time. That makes sense. I think that's really intuitive now for everyone as we've gotten used to using these kind of things. But yeah, this so I was going to say, the reason why I think this, like, to the 2-year-old, like, saying, oh, that's mine, right? Like, what is useful about that? If you think about this from a perspective of the what he calls like being efficient in economics, meaning like preserving things, using them efficiently. I think that, when the 2-year-old is saying, this is my crayon, there's two things about that, right? One is they're trying to protect it, right? They're trying to protect it from their older sibling snapping it in half, right? Because that would be wasteful. It would be lost, right? And the second thing is, there aren't just infinite crayons, right, lying around. So it's efficient for each person to have the resources that they need when they need them, and to preserve those, rather than just having just excess and waste. So I think actually, like, our instincts about property, are aligned with this efficient economy idea.
Okay. The part of universal access that appeals to me is something like there are a lot of extremely niche forms of property. Like, let's not delve completely into the realm of like luxury or status symbols, right? Let's just put that aside and say, I I'll use an example, say like a golf club. Okay, when you go to a bowling alley, you don't have to bring your bowling ball. You can, but you don't have to. I don't know at what point that iterated, but I learned at least at some point in time you used to have to. And with golf clubs, it isn't a norm that the golf course is the distributor of the highest possible quality um, golf clubs. Which, if you just think about it, if you take the sort of the luxury good piece or the status symbol piece off the table and you say, where would I want my golf clubs to be? Who would have the best ability to maintain, keep them up to date? Who would have the best ability to secure them? Right, to your point. So it's almost on a case by case basis. It's like, why is everybody dragging their own golf clubs around the world to play golf? Right, the only place you need them is on the. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I like there are some clear cases where everybody owning their own just seems sort of silly, accidental. And I think a golf club example versus bowling ball is like that's a great example. Like, why are those different? Like, there's no really reason for that. And it is like super inefficient for everyone to have their own stuff. And I think that's Peter's point. But then I was also thinking about, okay, how do we extend the 2-year-olds, like, this crayon is mine, to like the golf clubs, right? And I think it's like a cultural mental leap that we have to make from this thing is mine to these things are ours, because we all share them, and we have a sense of sort of protecting them and using them efficiently together. And you see that happen in some communities, like with a community garden, for example, that everybody shares the space and everybody protects the plants from, pests and things like that. And the biggest leap is to take that kind of all the way up, right?
Yes.
Everything is
Everything
all
belongs
of
to
ours.
everyone. Is all of ours. I
Yes.
love this. This really speaks to the type of conversation I always try to have, because I think the sort of the natural logical extension of this crayon is mine is that the world becomes atomized and broken down into things, and all of those things are owned by someone for whatever reason. But um looking at the bounty of the entire world as the birthright of all humanity, and then asking the question, well, how do we wisely, compassionately, efficiently distribute all those resources? I'm reticent to use the word fairly because that one becomes quite fraught. But you see what I'm saying,
Yeah.
right? I think that at least asking the question of access and putting it all the way up to that level is a very necessary part of this conversation at some point if we're going to transcend the level of a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
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 Point 4, growth. Building on consumption once again. The market economy requires near constant growth to maintain employment. This ties in a little bit with the growth of population as well. But you always hear about this in the government. We have growth, we need more growth, the GDP, we're lacking growth. It's basically just absurd. We need a steady state economy. The Earth is a finite system once again. Earth demands a balanced load economy, respecting dynamic equilibrium, where things come together in balance, not the necessity to exhaust just to, say, maintain labor.
Okay, so infinite growth seems to be presupposed. This is probably impossible if the world is a, finite system. So Peter's assertion here is that at some point we require the economy to maintain a steady state equilibrium.
Yeah.
But you would presume to say that that isn't exactly what we want.
Yeah, well, so I think at one level it is what we want, right? So I think of it kind of like a game of Risk that is like in a stalemate situation, right? Everybody has what they need, and everybody is cool about it. You don't have to expand and take and all that stuff unless you're trying to win. But I also think it's not good to think about humanity as just stopping at some point. I think a lot of us hope that we would continue on into the stars, to other planets, and I think that's a good thing to want as well. And I like to something I think is a good example is the Kardashev scale. You have type 1 civilization, type 2 civilization, and we're not even yet a type 1 civilization, right? So a type 1 civilization basically has figured out how to use their own planet efficiently, like the whole planet. And then the type 2 civilization has figured out how to use their whole solar system efficiently. And then the type 3 would be like a whole galaxy, something like that. So yeah, we're not even close to type 1 yet, right? We don't even know how to use the Earth efficiently yet. But that is the first step.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo your point, I think a lot of people's intuition is that they are living somehow at the end of history. And that just speaks to how short our lifetimes really are. And, we absolutely are going to be going somewhere. And I think we owe it to, our future generations to consider that wisely.
Yeah.
Point 5, competition. This inches into our new sociological developments that aren't talked about enough. Market system economy based upon personal and corporate competition in the open market, selling your labor, competing for market share. That's a completely metaphysical notion if you think about it, based on an early tribalistic form of scarcity and this notion that we can't possibly get along, there can't possibly be enough to go around, so we have to fight for everything and everything's out for themselves. What we've come to find is that human collaboration actually is at the core of all invention. It's called usufruct. And psychological studies now show long-term distortion with the competitive view. The great amount of distortion, corruption, crime you see, all you hear, the headlines, white collar, blue collar, all comes from this primitive notion of a competitive environment, and nothing is held as sacred.
So this is, in my opinion, this is the part I've found most interesting about Peter Joseph's philosophy in recent years, is his earnest digging into the ways in which our values are perverted by competition. He does not take it as a given that human beings are destined to live in a competitive state of nature. I think he's not oblivious to the fact that there are certain ways in which we compete, and there are also certain ways in which competition is a benefit. I don't think anyone is saying that, but I think the evidence he's trying to draw up is that competition does actually have perverse effects on our psychology, because in some ways it is a perverse incentive.
Yeah. Do you think competition is something that people just have to do? Like instinctually? Like do you think people have the need to compete at some level?
Yes, but there's a big caveat to my intuition on that. So we did need it, and we have always needed it. So those two things built the world that we inhabit. But the far more interesting question is, will we always need it? Like I like to say, try to put the person you are to the side and just engage your imagination. What would you want if you were a person who always had everything they needed and always would? What would you value? Because that takes pretty much all of the competitive necessity off the table. And then I don't know that very many people can stay there for very long. We are extremely inculcated into our way of being. But one of the things that I think I would value is not necessarily winning at someone else's expense, but I do think that, like, games and sports, ways to harness our competitive, quote, instinct, if it is so, in a productive, healthy way that isn't, always zero sum. Or what do you think? Does this kind of meet with your intuition as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it does. I think that competition is something it's definitely like evolved into us, and it's fun, right? I think we like doing it. And I think it's a kind of the fact that we like it and it's fun, I think it makes it feel more okay to the way we talk about it in like the marketplace. But that's just it's sort of abusing this instinct that we have. And I don't think that part is good. But I do think we will always compete with each other, right? Like we'll always want to do sports,
In
games,
some
that sort of
way,
stuff.
yeah, as
Yeah.
do I, in some way. But I think the abuse point, right, is that sure, it's fun to win, but we don't feel the commensurate loss in that moment, right? We struggle with empathizing with the zero sum component. And
Yeah.
it's important to know, in psychology, the term loss aversion. So human beings tend to avoid loss, tend to avoid equivalent loss, far more than seek the same gain. And you can see
Yeah.
how that would have evolved as well. But you end up with a system where it is felt, right? If it is a perfectly equal zero sum game, right? There one winner, one loser. It is the loss is actually felt more significantly than the gain.
Yeah.
So is competition necessary? It has been. Is competition harmful? Certainly. And then he's going to build on the ways in which we compete in the market.
Point 6, labor for income. Human survival is today contingent upon one's ability to obtain employment and enable sales. That's your right to life. If you can't get labor, you might as well die because you don't serve an economically efficient role. What does this mean to our development in science and technology? Mechanization is incredible. The advent of automation is making human employment more scarce at a minimum and possibly obsolete entirely. Mechanization is also more productive and efficient than human labor, which means it's socially irresponsible for us not to mechanize and enjoy the fruits of the abundance and ease and safety it can create.
So, what do you think about the idea that your right to life is perhaps not de jure tied to your ability to produce economic value, but it is de facto? It is the case that if you do not work, you will starve in many places in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially for people who have never experienced these things themselves, they've never experienced actually not having enough money, not having enough food, struggling to find a job when you really need one, losing your apartment. like people who haven't experienced those things, I think it's hard to understand the cost of that and the feelings associated with that, and the fact that it like psychologically changes you for the rest of your life when you end up in a situation of dire need like that. So uh, it's when we talk about like the right to life, and you might as well die if you can't work. That's a bit of a like extreme way of putting it, but when you are in that situation where you cannot work and you don't have like a social safety net, or you like government assistance or something, it does feel that way, I think, for people in that situation.
The reason I use somewhat extreme language here, though, is because I think the term right is extreme in this case. So the conversation around rights, I think, incepts people with this legalistic notion that they, deserve something for no other reason than the fact that they exist. Now, I happen to believe that that is true, but I also bear witness to a world that does not operate that way. So there is
Yeah.
this real cognitive dissonance between the story we are being told of the rights that we, quote, have, and then those ideals not being upheld systemically.
Yeah.
In
I
just
like
about
I like George.
every way.
Yeah. I like George Carlin's bit on this, right? Like, you don't have rights, you have privileges, and they can be taken away.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like there's rights at the sort of philosophical level, which is like things we think all people should have, right? Like nobody wants people to starve, right? That's we nobody says, I want you to starve. That
Ideally
we
not.
recognize that as like a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, who's going to guarantee that you don't?
Yeah.
Right. That's an entirely different question than
And
whether
then
you should.
the part of mechanization being brought forth now is like we are in the very early stages still of effectively supplanting most of the economic value of human labor, which has
Yeah.
this is a historically unprecedented thing that we
Yeah.
simply just don't know how the economy will restructure, if the economy will restructure around that fact.
Yeah. Yeah. Now it's an exciting time, is one way to put it, about mechanization, because we're now mechanizing like knowledge and thought and problem solving, these things that we were never able to mechanize before, but now we're doing that with AI. And if you look at the usage charts, everyone essentially is doing this, right? Like people who are searching for things on Google are now asking ChatGPT instead, and that's becoming just the normal thing that all of us are doing. And it's happening faster than any of the previous changes that have happened in technology or mechanization. And I don't know, some people may not have seen stuff like this, but there are also a lot of people working on connecting these AI agents, which essentially can only talk, directly with mechanical things in the real world, like robotic arms and cameras and so on. And when you connect these things together, suddenly a lot of stuff starts to seem possible that just seemed completely impossible only a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
This is happening very fast, and I think nobody knows how it's going to go. I think and by the time we figure it out, it will have already happened. So it's an exciting time. I think that just makes, the stuff we're talking about in this video that much more important to think about and figure out in now.
Yeah, not to go on a random tangent here, but like one of the biggest motivations for me having this conversation with you, and for me being interested to bring this type of conversation out publicly, is the idea that it isn't being had. We have these very archaic, poorly designed, iterated systems that have not been refreshed, are not being updated. The wise questions are not being asked, as far as like, yeah, sure, we can do this, but why are we doing it, and what's it for, and what will happen? And I
Yeah.
want to ask these questions, perhaps because I'm an annoying person, but I would dare say they are extremely necessary questions to ask and probably seek answers to.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Absolutely.
Scarcity and imbalance. Contrary to what most think, money and the movement of money that generates consumption economy is explicitly based on imbalance and inefficiency. It's really an inefficiency economy, an anti-economy. The poverty you see, everything in the disimbalance, that's not just some byproduct or a result of some greed institution or something like that. That is inherent to the system. The system wouldn't work if it was efficient and there was a balance in any element of human survival. Why would we want that? Abundance, equality. New sociological studies have found that equality is much more positive to public health. You compare the United States, a highly stratified society with deep imbalance, to Norway and Sweden that have much less levels of stratification. The public health in those less stratified societies blow us out of the water. Why not work to create an abundance through all these mechanisms of efficiency that technology now enables to meet human needs, reduce crime, all sorts of other obvious sociological phenomena?
So, what do you think of his idea of an anti-economy? Let's start with that.
Yeah. I think it's I think it's quite true. The game that people are playing is to make money, and you can make money in a lot of ways by creating or maintaining these inefficiencies and imbalances.
Arbitrage.
And yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like a good example is like, let's say that you have a robot, and this robot can like produce something like a toy. This robot makes toys, and you come up with a new version of the robot that can make the toys twice as fast, right? And you come up with a new version that can make it 3 times as fast. Well, you can release the one that makes the toys twice as fast, and then wait a while, just like sit on the fact that you have this other one that's even more efficient, and just wait until people kind of stop buying that thing, and then release the next one. That's the definition of inefficient, right? You know how to do better, but you're not doing it because you're trying to make the most money possible rather than trying to be as efficient as possible.
So, Peter Joseph makes the claim that poverty is inherent to the system. Do you see any sort of personal disagreement with that, given the idea that it does incentivize inefficiency?
Yeah, so this is something that I think he doesn't explain very well in this talk, but I think in some of his other materials online, he does talk about this a bit more. And yeah, I'm not completely sure. I think so one of the ways that I think about tell me if this makes sense. One of the ways I think about money flowing around is as like a network of money. And when people are spending money, they spend it first on the most essential things. So, and then it kind of tapers off from there. And what people are trying to do is extract as much money as they can from each individual. And if you can raise your prices and get more money out of somebody, then you will, right? And what's terrible about this is that there's things you want, right? But then there's things you need. You need food, housing. So the people who are, for example, increasing your rent, right? They're increasing your rent. That puts you at threat of like being out on the street, and you're not going to do that. So you're going to pay them, right? And then the grocery store is jacking up their prices. You're not going to go without food. You're going to pay them. So those people have an opportunity to take much more money away from you that you then won't spend on other things. And when you take this all the way to its limit, it's like these essential things are going to get as much money out of you as possible until you can't pay anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's poverty, right? Like when you don't have any money left over, they've been as efficient as possible at getting all of your money out of your pocket. That's poverty. And I think that's like a victory condition for real estate and
for the
and
system. Yeah.
food. And,
Okay.
exactly.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. I'd never thought of it exactly that way, but yeah. So that's a great way of explaining why poverty is inherent. Um, so then his other assertion is equality is better for public health, and you're asking the
Yeah.
question, what do we mean by equality?
Yeah. So I think equality and public health are both some of those trigger words we talked
Yes,
about before.
yes.
So what like how would you define public health here? Like what do you think he means?
Well, I think he is incorporating, happiness and mental well-being on top of, you know, people being physically fit and having proper nutrition, etc. And I think he is um, roping all of that into his definition of public health here. But I like that. That is actually how I would want to. I would want to have the public health conversation be holistic in that regard. I think the fact that our government doesn't both measure satisfaction, happiness metrics of its population, and treat those as a very important pass fail for the quality of whether or not it's doing its job well. Um, Even just doing that, just forcing those in quote power to take responsibility for directly benefiting the people that they purport to serve, right? And have that be tied to some kind of mandate, right? If your approval rating falls below X percentage, an election is forced or something. Like this is, you know, why wouldn't that be a baby step into a better system?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's a interesting question. Is like how can you effectively measure and act on like well-being like an approval rating
I
is like
think
one way to do it.
self-reports are fine in this regard. Actually, I do
Yeah.
think self-reports are fine because in aggregate, right?
Yeah.
You can't trust anyone's right. Anyone could try and put their thumb on the scale, but um, in this specific way, I think there are I forget. I think it's Bhutan that measures gross national happiness. I don't know if you've ever heard of this,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the first time I thought about it, I was like, oh yeah, that actually does seem insightful. Why wouldn't we care about this?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. There's a much sadder way to measure public health also, which is I think happening right now in the U.S. For example, the life expectancy of people
In
in the
decline.
U.S. has started going down,
Yep.
and you can measure like it's a there's a long time between the sort of cause and effect, but like people have more heart disease who also are in poverty, right? And why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but you can basically measure heart attacks at a societal level and get a sense of the impact of how things are changing over time. But I think that's that sort of stuff. Like that data is easy to collect, but it's hard to act on, and it doesn't have a fast enough reaction time.
Hmm.
So you need something more like you were saying, like something you can ask people like every day if you wanted, and that you could do something about it
Oh,
relatively.
if only we carried around a device, all of us in our pockets that could, report in real
Exactly.
time. What a miracle that would be.
Yeah,
Why aren't we using this? It's infuriating.
indeed. What about equality? So he also said equality. I think that's a much spicier one, maybe.
Oh,
But
of all of the things that I think even intelligent people I talk to get triggered by is a misunderstanding of what I mean when I use the term. Because I think what gets conflated in equality is, you know, um, the situation that is versus the situation that they view ought to be, right? So if you want to talk about a communist utopia as an example, right? All being equal, and then um, from each according to their ability to each according to their means, right? It's simply unrealistic, right? That framework of equality. There is no world where um, you would even want to put your thumb on the scale and force people to be equal in that way. The way I kind of mean equality of people, and I think the way that we would want to aspire to mean it is that we should aspire to think of ourselves as aspire to think of each human as equal in value to each other human, and that might even be a bad word, right? Because now you're just gonna be like, what do you mean by value? But that sort of, I feel like I am worth as much as any other person. I have some abilities and I have some disabilities, right? I can do things well, I do some things poorly, but that's going to be, if I'm an RPG character, someone else rolled a different number on different attributes, and that is part of what makes the world very interesting and wonderful, is that we all have different abilities to harness. So, but in that difference, there is an inherent inequality, but that doesn't mean I'm a better person. And that is actually my that's my litmus test for bullshit in any sort of political theory. This right here is whenever you hear someone telling a story about why X person deserves more or less than Y person, I smell bullshit. That's what I mean by value. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. For me, it gets a lot simpler to think about, and also more important when you go to the basics, right? So, like we were saying earlier, these rights that you have, like that you should be able to have food and shelter and things like that. So, if someone says one person deserves food and another person doesn't deserve food, that's wrong, and that's
wrong.
Obviously wrong.
Yes,
and that's the kind of equality that I think is the most important. Is just everybody gets these basic things. Everybody gets, basically the opportunity to live their life. And I think we're also very okay with, I mean, we know that we're all different, right? Like you said. And I think we're also okay with the idea that we don't all end up with the same outcomes, right? Like we don't all end up being exactly level, having all the same things, doing all the same things, having all the same opportunities. I don't think we expect that. I think if we get it at a basic level that is much higher than we're all getting right now, then to me, that's good enough. That's equality enough.
What you just articulated is a formulation of John Rawls' theory of justice. The term he uses is called the decent minimum. Are you familiar with this?
No, but it sounds
okay. So excellent. So you've come to this conclusion somewhat independently of Rawls' work. So John Rawls, I'll go through it quite briefly, but he says, imagine yourself being born into a society that you don't know how equal it would be from the outset. So he says, imagine from behind the veil of ignorance, you are born into a society. Would you choose to be born into a more equal or a less equal one? Right? Everyone would choose to be born into the more equal society because you don't know if you're going to roll the dice and be at the top or not, right? Then the second part of it is the idea of the decent minimum. So his theory, the way he's using the word justice, we ethically would want to build a society that aspires to build a floor, as far as needs go, beneath which none shall fall. Right? So we establish and I think, what is the saying? Comparison is the thief of joy. I think there will always be a way to redefine poverty to shoehorn it in there. But I think your point about needs of life being met, food, shelter, clothing, and I would even say things that are the emotional part of public health, friends, family, love. I would actually kind of class that in the sort of human needs category as well, but we can't really buy them in the same way.
That's a tough one, but I think you're right. That is something all of us need. Yeah. It's a basic need.
That's right. Okay.
Spectrum of social disorder, and there it is. You have a macro socioeconomic system, macroeconomic element that is basically funneling out this distortion from childhood all the way through every level of sociological exhibition, if you will. And everything you see is coming from this very sick distortion premise of economy. My interest, ultimately, relationship of macroeconomics to sociology. Part 2, change, value wars, societal potential, collapse, and transition. Over here are a series of social problems that you would see in the newspapers, very obvious: abject poverty, unemployment, destabilization, debt collapse, pollution, waste, all of which are completely technically obsolete.
Okay. None of these problems in Peter Joseph's
At all.
assertion have to exist.
Technically obsolete.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I get where he's coming from, and I think it's pretty much correct. So in the sense that if we applied all of our resources and all of our knowledge to solving any one of these problems, I think we have the capability to do that. I think that's what he means, and I think it's true. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's starvation is one that I kind of let's pick at one. So for my entire life, I'm pretty sure it has been true that the world has far more food than is needed to feed all humans. So the fact that anyone has starved to death in my lifetime, and I don't really want to look at the statistics, it's going to be kind of heartbreaking, but I imagine it's an enormous number, right? In the millions, the tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people in the time I've been alive have starved. Now I kind of have to know.
Obsolete. None of them have to exist at all.
All right. But like the idea that that problem wasn't seen as worth fixing is a very strange tragedy to behold. The idea that every human alive doesn't see it as a complete, unacceptable moral failing every second of every day, every single time another person starves to death, right?
Yeah.
The fact that that isn't shocking to us, that we lack this type of empathy, I just don't know what to do with that. It's because I can't do anything about it. But it seems one of the most obviously wrong and reprehensible ways in which the perversions he's talking about, kind of the perversions of our economy, kind of bubble up to the surface.
Yeah. I think this goes to one of the big things I wanted to talk about towards the end, which is it true that we don't think it's terrible? I think we all think it's terrible.
No.
I think
I don't think we think it's terrible enough to do what is very possible to do about it.
Okay. I'm not sure about that though.
Okay.
I don't think the problem is one of like not considering it important, and I don't think the problem is one of like being unwilling to do something. I think it's more that we just don't know what to do. I think every individual who's living in this system that Peter Joseph is talking about.
Yeah.
I think individuals don't know. What do I do? I think we all know I personally cannot save people from starving. So what's step one of solving this problem?
Having this conversation.
Maybe so. Then what's step two? Right? We have to see a path from what we're doing right now to like solving the problem.
So the way I look at this is that we are told this gets on a very long and exhausting tangent, so we don't have to go down it, but like the thing that I advocate is more democracy. So let's get away from political parties, which are undemocratic. Let's get away from representatives, which are undemocratic. Let's create a system by which we can actually enfranchise people to choose in real time, and then let's test this theory, right? If that structure is built, let's see what we actually care about. Because right now, right, I don't mean to keep hammering the point home on how abhorrent I find it, but right now, like most patriotism, like what amount of money is spent on the pageantry of patriotism, spent on flags, spent on flying athletes to the Olympics to fly their flags at the fuck you starve games? It's unacceptable. You know, I think as far as a single person, like it seems like a mismatch between at some point the decision makers fucked this up.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying I'm the powerful one. I'm not going to fix it, right? If you put me in charge, I could fix it, but I'd probably create 10 other problems in the process. I don't want to be in power.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but this is okay. There's a lot of good stuff in there. This is stuff I'm thinking about a lot,
Right.
which is, what is a decision maker here? And like you said, if we were all actually sort of deciding together democratically, like really truly democratically, just everyone in the world, what would we decide? What would we want? And I think we don't know the answer, right? Because we haven't really tried that
simply
yet.
Don't know. I agree. We simply don't know. Maybe it doesn't work.
Maybe not, but maybe it does. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so that's technical.
Technically obsolete. None of them have to exist at all. At minimum, they could be reduced to a very core degree, those that are a little bit more subjective. Removing the environmental and sociological inefficiency inherent to the market and simply applying modern scientific understandings resolves or greatly reduces all of these issues. That is our...
Okay. So this thought jumped out to you.
Yeah. This was the one that hit me the hardest.
Okay. Well.
So these two words, simply applying.
This is your bigger criticism of Peter Joseph then.
Yes.
Okay, good.
So
all right.
I think the way that he imagines what a solution looks like, I think is probably way off the mark. So simply applying, no, there is no simply applying. And that's what you and I were just discussing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we know how to solve world hunger. We just need to simply apply something. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
And so I think that's actually, that's the big unsolved problem here, is actually how to apply the knowledge that we know, the desires that we have to solve the things we consider to be important. How do we all together decide to organize ourselves and our resources to do those things? I think it's really obvious that actually in another one of his talks, he talks about how the government and like capitalist corporations are essentially the same, right? And as throughout history, they've shifted power back and forth, one controlling the other, but really it's one system. And we know that system is not simply applying modern scientific understanding, right? It's doing a whole other set of things.
It's doing whatever it wants to ensure that those in power stay in power and stay wealthy.
Yeah,
of course.
And so, yeah, what is this simply applying? I can't help but think that I mean, I've obviously never met this guy, and I've only seen so much of his material, but I can't help but think he has some kind of fantasy about like a group of really smart people getting together, like scientists, and somehow solving the world's problems.
Well, actually, interestingly, I remember the second Zeitgeist film I watched. At the end, his assertion was that we would take stock of all the resources in the world and then outsource the decision making to AI, which 20 years ago sounded absolutely crazy, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it. But that was my big criticism of Peter Joseph until more and more recently. I'm like, ooh, this actually might be a practical solution to the simply part, right? We can't do it simply, but I think he might be suffering from a similar thing that I suffer from when I'm, say, parsing a risk board, right? It's like I have this specific expertise. I've learned so much, so deeply on the subject. And I know Peter Joseph reads about politics, economy, sociology, right? So perhaps for him it is simple. And perhaps he assumes perhaps he assumes too much that other people think anywhere close to what he thinks.
Yeah.
And that assumption, I think, is borne out in the use of that word.
I'm curious, actually, if you feel it. Let me ask you this. Have you started to find it difficult to see the game of risk from the perspective of a new player?
Absolutely.
Because
it's impossible. It's impossible. It is it's becoming a problem with the show.
Yeah.
The viewers come in and they struggle to empathize with me. So the things that irk me, they don't even get, and they're very easily able to empathize with the person I'm shitting on. And they're like, "Oh, now you're just being an asshole." Well, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe I could be nicer, I suppose.
Yeah, it's funny because I can't tell either, just because I've
Yeah.
known you and the show for so long that I also don't know what it would be like as a new viewer, to see that perspective. So yeah, maybe you're right that Peter Joseph is kind of suffering from
I
that
see it. I
equivalent
see it in his
problem.
work. I see the visceral frustration of having to defend himself from being called a communist for the 1000th time. Right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
enough of this, of this very bad model the term that doesn't even really work, or right? He's not
yeah.
even talking about that, right?
Yeah.
But
Being called a communist is like the Australia noob slam of this.
yes, it is though. It is. That's a great fucking
Yeah.
metaphor. Oh my god.
our potential. And since we don't maximize that potential, unfortunately, because of this framework we're in, we're faced with a unique form of collapse that many are not talking about enough. There's 3 nails in the coffin as far as I'm concerned. Unemployment, sorry to say, based on the way things are going, you're not going to see percentage employment levels that you've ever seen in the past for the human population. It's over. Energy costs, only going to rise from here on out. We live in a hydrocarbon economy. There's absolutely no investment or true intention of the government or corporate institutions to move forward with any type of renewables that will replace the current massive infrastructure we've created, and far too much money will be made as the system fails because of the scarcity of this thing. Debt failure. Am I the only one laughing at the fact that there's this fictional notion of debt that's like dominoes knocking down countries one by one? Transition. Here's the value war. Of all the times I speak with people about these issues, they tend to understand it, but they have these value associations that hold on to old artifacts of the prior system. It's a value war. How do we get from one to the other? What can we do to inspire change and create social reform? And that is
How do we get from one to the other?
Yeah.
Well,
By simply
by simply
applying.
applying.
Yeah.
No, so what I think he's overly negative in this framework. I think he is calling out a lot of bullshit that I've obviously seen and felt in my life. The stories we're told do not match up to the reality. And that gap is the arbitrage. That gap is where I don't know what word you want to use, powers that be, the oligarchs, the business interest, the governmental but these people who stand to benefit from the status quo tremendously, they are winning the value war currently because the value is $1. So if there is such a thing as a value war, then it kind of begs that earlier question: what would you value? What would you want if you had all of your needs met always, and always would?
Yeah.
Like, what do you what do you think you would want?
Yeah. Actually, something that I have enjoyed thinking about once was so in like the Lord of the Rings universe, there are elves who are immortal. And so what do they do with all that time? And if you read the books and you look, you see that they basically spend it on partying. Like that's and Tolkien uses the word merrymaking, right? That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to have just the best top-notch parties all the time. And I think they're just enjoying life, right? That's what they're doing. And we're simple creatures in a lot of ways. We It doesn't take a lot to make us happy. So I don't think we need to have a lot much. So what do I mean by this? It's not super expensive to actually have everybody in the world have a good life. Like even if you measured it in dollars.
Yeah, that decent minimum isn't all that hard to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed.
is the big question. What will you do? what kind of forum, what kind of social awareness, what kind of role do you think you could play? Are you going to maximize your own self-interest, or are you going to realize that your self-interest is only as good as the integrity of society as a whole, where self-interest must become social interest in order for us to survive? That is the new equation, and that is the big question. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I can answer his question for myself, and this is something I've always done, is I've never pretended to be an altruist. I am absolutely looking out for number one, and I advocate that other people do as well. That actually creates, if that is the default norm, that actually creates a fair market. And in the system that we currently have, the fair market is the best market we could hope for. But given that, and given that I want to live in a better world, if I am able to do so, which is already a bit of an arrogant thought, if I'm able to make the world even a little bit better, even a tiny, tiny little bit better for having existed, then I feel a duty to do so. Right? I feel like on an ethical level, that is sort of that's what guides my decision. So in business, I've never sought to cause harm. And I've always looked at projects that were ethically neutral at best. Like most of my adult life, I was running a landscaping company, and I don't pretend that lawns are all that useful or all that energy efficient or need to be or any of that, right? We're kind of wasting a lot of very valuable land that could be growing other things. But I don't feel like I was harming the world either, and I was getting by. I actually think what I'm doing now is slightly better, just in terms of providing entertainment for people, and then maybe peppering it in with a little bit of, philosophical thought. I get it on a daily basis. I get people coming into Twitch saying, "Thanks, Pete, you've helped me so much for X or Y reason," and that means a lot to me. It's strange to know that my voice would be worth anything at all, and then you and I having met from halfway around the world and having this conversation. This is my part. This is my tiny contribution. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's great, and the part where you are looking out for yourself, and which, by the way, I think is totally philosophically and ethically fine, right? Like I agree with you actually, and I think if you tell people to devalue themselves, that's not a good place to start.
No.
But there is something also that is bigger than ourselves that we also care about, and I think when you look through history, there were even times when, especially I think when we had shorter lives, that people would think about the well-being of their descendants that didn't exist yet and that they would never meet, but they still cared about, like what I do, for example, I'm going to build this farmhouse because I know that it's going to be usable for 100 years.
It's true.
And
we've never been worse stewards of history than we are right now.
Yeah, right now, like everything is just disposable crap that just goes right away. And I mean, he talked about that before too, right? Like that's a feature, right? You make more money with disposable crap.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's important that most people have some kind of mindset like this of a thing bigger than themselves that they also care about.
Yes.
And I think many people do. I don't know if it's most people, but many people do. It's something that we feel, and I think it's great. And it's what makes good communities, when you have a bunch of people who get together who all have this sense of a thing bigger than themselves together. That's when some of the best things happen.
So my last question for you here is, what was it about this video that you decided to choose to pick at? What stuck out to you that maybe we just want to draw a little bit more attention to before we end?
Yeah. Well, I wanna add a couple more thoughts
Please.
about like this. What do you do now?
Yeah.
So I think so he asks this question as if you sort of have a responsibility to change yourself, to become to change how you think about things in order to overcome this and do this transition, right? And I just don't think that ever works that way, right? You don't change how things work by telling people the way that they are thinking right now is somehow
It's
wrong.
wrong. Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's not a great starting position to build to start a conversation with anyone.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
no. So I think to actually do the kind of transition that he's imagining here, you need a couple of things. You need you need tools that you can use together. And that's something like an example of that would be, like you said earlier, if we were all using our phones together to express our like democratic feelings about something, how things are going, that's a tool we could use at a large scale
Yes.
to do something. And I think we need tools like that. And the second thing we need is, I think again, it was from some of his other material. He was pointing out that we are genetically basically exactly the same as we were, 50,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But if you think about how much society is different now,
Yeah.
the way we think is different, it means that we can do things differently. And how do you do that on purpose? I think that's a really challenging question, but it's something like talking and expressing things. It's something like giving this talk that he gave, right? He's trying to do it. He's trying to put ideas in all of our heads that he thinks if we think this way, maybe all together it will yield a different result. And so that's why I wanted to talk.
It's funny you say there, because like I have been very influenced by Peter Joseph's thinking. So I have had my mind changed. And, there's always a better way to approach it. One of my big fears actually is that this is overly complex for the necessary critical mass of people, and or slightly more tinfoil hat, that the quality of the discourse for the average person has been intentionally reduced over a generational period or two, such that this is now inaccessible to them, which acts as a system of control, right? Or not even a system of control, but it's a system that perpetuates the status quo.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the people who are making money, making the real money right now, they don't want us to ever talk about this kind of topic, right? They want us to have our bread in circuses and not pay attention to how the system is working,
right,
and just be a part of it that pays. So yeah, there was one more important thing I wanted to mention, which is timely, which is there's this subjective study called AI safety, where it's people trying to solve the problem of how do we make the AI do what we aligned with our interests. Exactly right. And I think it's important for people to know that AI safety, that people are making progress on that subject.
Oh, good.
But at the same time, it's far outpaced by the progress on AI itself.
Right.
So
that doesn't the risks continue to grow.
The risks are growing really fast, and we still don't have a real idea how to reduce those risks. So I'm very pessimistic at the moment about his idea that like an AI is going to help us make decisions.
You think it's far more likely the opposite is true? That the AI will be destructive.
I think the AI. So I love thinking about this. This is like a whole other topic we could dive into. But basically, I think human beings always use ourselves as a metaphor for other creatures, for other minds, and yeah. And I think when we think of like is an ant conscious? Is a dog conscious? And we think the ant. Many of us think maybe not, but maybe. The dog, we think definitely. I think it's just because the dog is more similar to us, right? It's like we're just using ourselves as the standard.
In an ant way.
Right.
Yes.
And so, but here's the thing: the AI is such a different thing from anything that we've thought about before,
Hmm.
that when you start to try to think like an AI, it's really mind-bending. And all of our notions of like even the idea that it wants something is actually nonsensical.
Hmm.
But it's so hard for us to
Not
escape this.
anthropomorphized.
That,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, exactly. So you really have to get completely outside the mindset of a human being to start to think about what the AI might actually do.
Yeah, because it's not alive. So even the notion of fundamental desire, I never put that together, but that's very insightful. Even the notion of an AI having a fundamental desire one way or another isn't necessarily true.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. It
Oh,
doesn't want anything.
how do we
Yeah.
know that it wants anything? I like that. That's actually a bit of a relief. Well, no, because
Well, is it though?
I think so. I
So
think so because if a tool doesn't want anything, then it stays a tool.
that is maybe true, but I mean, maybe we should do like an AI safety, a
Absolutely,
whole
we can do
discussion,
whatever, man. I love this. You know,
because
I love this. By the way, thank you. You
there-
brought something really cool out. I hope this is well received.
yeah, me too. But yeah, I'm happy to talk more about it. But so I do have optimism though. Like
Good.
I wanted to say I'm pessimistic about AI being like a problem solver at this level, but I am optimistic about people because that's just a choice that I make, right? I think a lot of us and I was in this situation before. You look at all this situation, you look at that big red list of problems on there, and you go, nobody's ever going to solve any of these, right? And sure, you can think that, and you know, like we talked about before, you get this kind of benefit from being a cynic or a skeptic, right? But I just choose not to be because I see, like I said, we need tools and we need something like culture or philosophy combined to do something different. And I think tools are something that we can build now that we could never build before.
Yeah, I've come to the same conclusion as you. The way I attempt to explain the logic of my optimism is that, you know, there are an infinite number of worlds where I'm doomed. And it doesn't really make much sense for me to spend too much time on those things if I'm doomed, because there's just
Yeah.
nothing I can do about it. So I'm going to spend time and energy thinking about the world where I'm not and try and build that.
Yeah. It's kind of like a reverse upside down Pascal's wager, right?
Sure.
So like Pascal's wager is I'm going to pretend as if God is real and behave ethically, because if he is, then you know, great, I go to heaven. If he's not, then at least I was a good person. I don't really lose anything. It's the same idea. It's, you know, I'm going to pretend we can do something and solve problems, because if I'm right, it's amazing. And if I'm wrong, at least I enjoyed the journey of
I
trying.
wouldn't use the word pretend there. I think this effort is not wasted. One of I spend a lot of time thinking about this, but like, what is it that is in our nature? You talked about the malleability of the human animal from 50,000 years ago to today. Well, every single thing that was created first in the mind of a person who believed it could exist, right? We literally create our world. So this isn't like an esoteric notion. It is I would argue, this is our ecological niche.
Yeah.
The thing that we do as an organism is we invent things that didn't exist. So every time, and I speak directly to the audience with this one, every time you hear something, you're talking to a person, they say it's never going to happen, that's impossible. Every time you hear that and you agree, the only thing that makes it true is the fact that you agree. I really do believe that anything is possible with enough effort. Right? We have shown that to be. We've shown me enough evidence. We as human beings have shown me enough evidence that we can create and solve any technical problem we choose to, with the right effort and incentives. I mean,
By simply applying,
yeah, it's not
our
going to be hard at all.
scientific.
It's
Yeah.
not, I love this. Thank you for your precious time.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I hope you guys all liked it too. So all feedback is very welcome. If you want to have a longer form conversation about it, come on down to the Kill Pete Strategy Discord philosophy forums. I'm going to post the video, and hopefully there will be some kind of chat about this. I've kind of been like, YouTube comments aren't particularly useful for having um, the necessary amount of depth required to have a conversation about some of these things. But I've built a forum where, you know, the maximum amount of free speech, given the limitations of the platform, can exist. And as long as you are a cool, respectful person who is looking to learn and grow and understand things, you'll be very welcome to join the conversation. Thank you, Sean. Awesome work.
Great.
Very happy with
Thanks,
this.
Pete.
Okay.
This was a lot of fun.
Be well.
You too.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. That was The Big Question. Peter Joseph, TEDx Talk. We did deep dive into it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Extra special thank you to Sean for being here with me and for being the impetus for getting this done. I really hope you guys liked it. I'm super curious to hear feedback. I'm going to obviously be very interested to hear the comments about this. If you want to involve yourself in a discussion on this video, I will open up a thread on my Discord where we can actually get into the nitty gritty and talk about anything and everything you want to talk about, up to and including the limits of speech on the platform. I don't suppose that YouTube comments are the ideal means for getting into any sort of depth of understanding. I'm sure you guys can appreciate why I say that. So I would ultimately encourage and direct the conversation to my Discord if you are so inclined to avail yourself of that opportunity. But folks, thank you for watching. I really, really, really do hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found some of this interesting at the very least. I know a lot of these ideas are extremely thought-provoking. I know a lot of them actually are triggering. As we said, they brush up against very deeply held beliefs one way or another for people. But I encourage folks to think and discuss these ideas and all ideas with an open mind and with a goal of mutual understanding. And that is how we are going to build a better world together. Folks, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And until next time, for all of you on the path to world domination, good games and good luck.